Everyone to Red Planet Live. I am your host, Ashton Zeth. I am elated to be hosting the Mars Society's podcast and leading the conversation about human exploration of the universe and the future settlement of Mars. As a longtime space enthusiast, I am passionate about STEM education and making humanity an interplanetary species. Thank you everyone for joining us today and supporting Red Planet Live. Now, today we are going to be closing out the year 2023. I can't even believe that the year's almost over. But we're closing out this year and we're going to do something special today. So our conversation today is going to focus and feature a woman that I've admired and followed for some time. This is Dr. Shawna Pandya, who is a Canadian physician, aquanaut, scientist-astronaut candidate with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. She's a skydiver, a pilot in training, VP of Immersive Medicine with Luxonic Technologies, Associate Fellow of the Aerospace Medicine Corporation, and Fellow of the Explorers Club. Now, it doesn't stop there. The only thing, greater than her resume is just how sweet and personable that she is. She is also the director of IIAS. My cursor's freaking out. There we go. The IIAS Space Medicine Group, chief instructor for IIAS Space Medicine course, a host with the World Extreme Medicine podcast series, primary investigator for the Shad Canada Blue Origin Student Microgravity Competition, member of the AIAA Ascend Guiding Coalition, medical advisor for Astria and Above Space Development Corporation, and seasonal lecturer for the Technology and Future of Medicine at the University of Alberta. Dr. Shawna Pandya, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Hi. So thank you so much for having me for your year-end podcast. I'm so excited to be here.
We've got a lot of excitement about today's conversation, so I'm just so appreciative for your time and coming on, and can't wait for our conversation. I know we've got a lot of interest from our audience. So reminder everyone, as you're tuning in, if you have some questions for Dr. Pandya, please put those in the chat and we'll get those answered. But before we kick off the conversation with Shawna, I have just two Mars Society announcements. The first is that the Mars Society has officially launched its crowdfunding campaign for the Mars Technology Institute. So settling Mars will require dramatic advancements in both biotech, artificial intelligence, advanced energy, as well as many other areas of research. MTI will develop these technologies and commercialize them for use on Earth. So if successful, the ultimate goal is to create a network of new technology companies with collectively both the know-how and the financial power to enable the human settlement of the red planet. So MTI is a 501c3 nonprofit, and that it will raise its initial capital by donations, all of which are tax deductible. So we need your help with that. There are various levels of donations, and each level includes giving perks, including an MTI supporter patch, an annual Mars Society membership, an autographed copy of President Dr. Robert Zubrin's next book, The New World on Mars, also an MTI Pioneer Medal Medallion, and founder plaque. So for those that contribute the maximum donation, in addition to all of the previously mentioned items, you will be given a pro rata invitation to participate in first round private placement stock offering of the previously mentioned items. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm hearing myself recording. There we go. Did you hear that? Or is that just me? Oh, it was a hot second. Okay, there we go. The recording went away. So every donation fuels our mission to advance space exploration and technology. The Mars Society has a proven track record of pioneering innovations for Mars missions. Join us in making a difference. For more information and to donate, go to marssociety.org or marstechnology.institute. So secondly, if you are looking for the right gift for the space enthusiasts in your life, the Mars Society store has new items. Some of my favorites include the Mars Dust Globe. You'll see this sometimes in the background behind me as we're talking. Can't forget the Mars Colony puzzle. I am taking this home for the holidays, and I'm going to do this with my family when I get home. You'll also see that there are mugs, bracelets, stickers, T-shirts. There's also the Perseverance rover that you can build as well. There's a ton of cool items on there. So if you're looking for a gift, look no more. Mars Society's shop online. So check it out, marssociety.org. Okay, announcements out of the way. Let's focus back on Shawna here. So Like I said before, on Red Planet Live, I do a segment called Question of the Day. It's meant to be an icebreaker. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to know your opinion. So today's question is, if given the opportunity to leave Earth on a one-way mission to Mars, would you go?
That is a great question. And I love hearing this question because my answer is always tell me the details. Tell me what is the mission profile? What are the risks? How have you mitigated them? What is the objective? What are we going to be the first? Are we going to establish a permanent off-world human settlement? Are we going for scientific breakthroughs? What are the reasons? So tell me the details. Tell me how you thought about them. Tell me about the habitat, about radiation mitigation. Tell me if there's coffee involved, because I think that's an important detail. And then I can give you my answer. So I need to hear about what exactly the mission entails. I always like to say the devil's in the details. So that's your non-answer to your question of the day.
I love it. It's definitely the scientific answer, and I appreciate that you said it that way. For me personally, I think that my purpose is to contribute to getting humans to Mars, but I'm not necessarily the person to go. Would love the opportunity to go to space and come back maybe on a day trip like Kelly, but not necessarily be the one to go to Mars. I think that there are better, more equipped, well-trained individuals that would be the right person to go on that mission. So for me, this time it's a no, but I like your answer better. We got to know all the risks, what's involved. I think that's the right way to go. Excellent. Well, let's jump right into questions. So again, I want to remind everybody as you're tuning in, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. We will be sure to answer those as we go throughout. So Shawna, for you, I think that it makes sense to start at the beginning. So, have you always wanted to be a doctor when you were a child? Did you want to heal people, and were you always interested in space? And did you see those ever combining in the future?
That's a great question. So before I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to be an astronaut, like I suspect many of those in the audience today. And for me, that love of space came from two things. So first of all, I did a lot of camping with my family through school, through Girl Guides growing up. I was in outdoor ed all throughout junior high. And so when you're camping, you're privy to these beautiful night skies, and you see these amazing vistas of starscapes. And I would just look out as a kid and think, I want to be a part of that. I want to be amongst that. So, the inspiration started out being in nature on Earth, ironically. And then the other part of it was growing up in the 90s, watching Canada's first female astronaut, Dr. Roberta Bondar, go to space, and thinking, hey, she can do that. That means I can do that because she's Canadian, she's female, I'm Canadian, I'm female. So now, just to be like her, I need to be a neuroscientist, physician, and then astronaut, because that's how it works when you're a kid. So that's kind of what spurred that. So medicine came about. That interest came about by virtue of having a good role model, and then later on, as I applied for medicine and realized I was doing this for space, and I did my master's at the International Space University, I realized that there was this whole field of study called space medicine, because space is inherently dangerous. Space is trying to kill us. And so we need to keep astronauts healthy. We need to mitigate those risks. And I was lucky enough to do my internship at the European Astronaut Center, part of the European Space Agency in Cologne, Germany. I was with their crew medical support office. And that's the first time that I really realized that, hey, there is this overlap between space and medicine, and we can actually make careers out of it. So that was the beginning of it all. And ever since then, everything I've done, I've fallen more and more in love with. And I'm just really lucky to be able to do what I do in science and operations and exploration as it pertains to space medicine.
That's incredible. So besides the first female Canadian astronaut, was there anybody else that you looked up to, was a role model, and helped put you on this career path?
Totally. It's so funny that being part of the International Space University, and then a couple of opportunities that came later that I was interested in, you just kind of take it for granted that all of these amazing space professionals and astronauts are giving you their time. So JAXA astronaut, Dr. Chaki Mukai, who's just, so brilliant, so accomplished, but so kind. She's a physician. I believe she's a cardiac surgeon. She's a veteran astronaut, but she's also a poet and an artist. And she was so helpful in serving as kind of a counselor, a guidance counselor, when I would talk about what I wanted to do. Walter Peters, who was then one of the instructors and later a dean at the International Space University, he's the one who came up to me when it was time to think about our internships. And he said, hey, would you ever go to the European Astronaut Center? And I hadn't known that was an option. And it was just, really the start of being able to contribute meaningfully to human spaceflight. I was able to make a quick reference guide to the autonomous transfer vehicle, which was at that time a brand new delivery vehicle to the International Space Station. So that was the start of it. And then one of the other formative experiences, something that I had on my agenda for a very long time. So this is the ultimate example of playing the long game, because I was interested in space and medicine as early as high school, as early as being a kid. And I knew that there was a Canadian Space Agency sponsored internship that would send medical students and residents down to NASA's Johnson Space Center, but you had to be a fourth-year medical student or a first-year resident. So I was way not qualified as a high school student. But by building my resume throughout the years, throughout undergraduate, throughout my master's, throughout medical school, I was lucky enough to be a competitive enough candidate and be one of 5 Canadians selected that year to go down to JSC. And it was really cool because they flew us to Montreal for a briefing at the CSA headquarters. And, in that briefing, they said, and any astronauts that are down there, we'll get them to, spend time with you and liaise with you. And you're thinking, I remember thinking to myself, that's really nice of you to say, CSA, but they're astronauts. They have better things to do than hang out with a medical student. And then sure enough, on my first day there, I'm walking into my off-campus office, and I was really frazzled because I'd lost my passport. And as a foreign national, I'm not allowed on a federal base. I can't go onto JSC with this thing that I've worked so hard to do, to spend a month at JSC. So the phone in my office rings, and I pick it up and I said, I'm sorry, I have to put you on hold. I'm looking for my passport. And then I realized that the person on the other end of the phone said their name was Commander Chris Hadfield, or Lieutenant. Yeah. And so this man was busy. He was training to be commander of the International Space Station at the time. So it's not like he didn't have other things to do, but he was so diligent in spending time with myself and the other medical student who was down there on the CSA grant. And, he would take us for coffee. He would answer our questions. He did not have to do that, but he really paid it forward. David Saint-Jacques and Jeremy Hansen had just moved down there. This was about 3 years after their selection. David Saint-Jacques took us sailing. I had no idea about sailing, no idea what I was doing. He taught us the ropes, literally. Jeremy Hansen took us on a walking tour. They didn't have to do that. And it was just so kind. And then the other influential figure who remains a friend and now a collaborator to this day is someone with whom I just bonded on the fact that we had the same great initials. That was our running joke. And that's, of course, astronaut Scott Parazynski, who, if you look at his track record, he's climbed Everest, he's been an aquanaut, he has done a historic Hubble Space Telescope EVA, and we first met on social media. He was very supportive. And then when I was down in Houston, he was running, I think it was the University of Texas Medical Branch Innovation Center. He gave us a tour and, was so supportive. So it's being around all of these people, it was just, they facilitated the way, they catalyzed the way, and they were just so giving of their time. And so when I think of what it means to be an astronaut and the astronaut mentality, part of it is being so good at what you do, being so driven, but part of it is uplifting others and the next generation on the way. And that really sticks with me. So that's and during, day, there are so many people who have helped pave the way.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's so wonderful to hear that, these people that you look up to, these people that you see from, afar, and they're in your industry and you look up to. It's so great to know that they really are as wonderful in person when you get to make those connections with them. And they want to see you succeed as well. It's not just, every man is out for themselves, but how can we as a collective all get to a common goal, and we're all working towards the same thing. So I love to hear that. Speaking of individuals that are involved in a variety of areas of expertise, they've got a lot of skills. As I said before, you're a physician, scientist, astronaut candidate, aquanaut. martial artist, diver, skydiver, pilot in training. How do you find time for all of these activities? I feel like I can barely keep, 3 balls in the air. I don't know how to juggle everything, but you seem to do it all. How do you
So
have time?
first of all, I can't juggle. So let's get that out of
Okay,
the way.
there's one.
Uh,
There's one thing you can. Okay.
Yeah, and I've had people try to teach me multiple times. It just can't be done. However, a very cool Mars Society link before I answer your question is on one of my Mars Desert Research Station (MDRS) tours. We have a photo of a teammate juggling on EVA on Mars, which is a really cool memory. So, to your question, to your point, I like to say there's a season for everything. So it's not like I am flying a plane and then jumping out of that same plane, safely skydiving, landing in the ocean, diving out, and then swimming my way to the shore, running into the emergency room just in time to deliver baby. Like that is not it at all. Different things require my focus at different times. It's the way I cope with my travel schedule. I'm often traveling. I can hit 11 cities in the course of a month, and it's sort of focusing on the big picture initially and the overarching goals, making sure the logistics are arranged, the flights are booked. But then once I get to a specific destination, that is all I'm focused on. I'm not going to worry about the next 6 or 7 talks or papers or things that need to be delivered because it doesn't need to be part of my radar. So, when I say there's a season for everything, just as if you're a star athlete and you are, training for lacrosse, hockey, badminton, volleyball, basketball, football, you're not training for all of those sports in the same 24-hour period. There's a season in which you will focus on each one of those things.
Yeah. Okay. So time management, I imagine, is a skill you're probably pretty good at. With your various roles and you're involved in a variety of different organizations, one that I saw and I know that you're involved in is being VP of Immersive Technologies with Luxonic Technologies. Tell us about that role. What is that like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so this is a really cool origin story because my involvement with Luxonic actually came from my first underwater mission. And so I was the crew medical officer on our first Aquanaut mission. It was called the Neptune mission because everything is an acronym in space and exploration. So Neptune stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. And we were lucky enough to do a 5-day underwater mission at the Jules Undersea Lodge in the Florida Keys. And that is not too far from the Aquarius Reef Base where NASA sends its astronauts to become aquanauts on their NEMO or NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations missions. And one of the technologies we were testing was the world's first digital twin of a radiology workflow. So radiologists on Earth typically have to have a series of high resolution monitors, a very dark room, lots of physical space, their dictation software, and it takes up a lot of infrastructure and physical space. So what this Canadian company had done was they had built it all in VR to the same standards. And because there's applications not just for remote and rural communities, but also for space with a lightweight portable technology, it was one of the technologies we opted to test on our mission. And so what I got to do as part of that mission, I slipped on this headset and I was able to collaboratively meet the head of radiology in Saskatoon, Canada, over 4,600 kilometers away. And we were able to review the simulated image of a trauma patient together. So that was the first, encounter with Luxonic. And then they were again at the Canadian Space Agency's Space Health Conference a month later. And they loved what I did. They loved my background. So I was asked to come on board as the VP of Immersive Medicine. And that was just the beginning. So it's really cool to be able to merge my love of space, of extreme environments, and my clinical expertise to help develop cool products. So we've developed virtual reality training modules for astronauts on long duration missions. We've created procedures for astronauts to be able to practice because as the crew medical officer, you may have no previous medical training. You're given about 15 to 60 hours of pre-training to before you go aboard the International Space Station, depending on who you ask. And so if you first learn to stick an IV into your patient, maybe 9 months before your mission, and the next time you call upon that skill is 9 months later, your poor patient's going to look like a pincushion. So we've developed that skill in VR. And, it's been this wild ride where we've gotten to do a lot of cool stuff for space, for the Canadian Space Agency, and for Earth. And very coolly, like I said, it's been a busy year. We also developed one of the world's first mixed reality point of care ultrasound devices for the Canadian Space Agency's Deep Space Healthcare Challenge. We were lucky enough to advance not just through the first, but the second, and now the third round. So we were one of 5 finalists in Montreal last month presenting our work. We're still waiting to hear the winners, so fingers crossed. But in a very cool full circle moment, David Saint-Jacques tried our technology because he's also a physician as well. And it was just, really cool to be doing good stuff for space and for Earth that will make a difference in healthcare for those who need it most, whether you're talking about exploration class missions or communities in need.
Yeah, I think I saw on Instagram that you were recently demoing the mixed reality, the point of care ultrasound system. So you're waiting to hear on the winner of that. When will we see that potentially deployed, like on the International Space Station?
Yeah, well, if anyone has any leads there, I'd love to talk. But typically, with our VR technologies, we have flown them in parabolic flight. So whenever we're talking about space readiness, there's this concept called technology readiness level advancement, so TRLs. And so you can't just go from concept to flying to space. You have to do it in stepwise fashion to advance, to retire risk. And so we've flown our VR suite, the radiology reading room, in microgravity on a parabolic flight. So the next step would be to fly this mixed reality point of care ultrasound system on a parabolic flight. So that the plan for that is next year, if schedule is willing, and then hopefully to space after that.
How exciting. Okay, well, I'm going to keep tabs, and as soon as I see that, hey, that parabolic flight has happened, I'm going to be cheering you on about that. So very exciting. Speaking of those flights, I know that your friend Kelly Girardi, as she was training for her recent flight to space last month, I know she was doing a lot of those parabolic flights. But like I said, last month, she launched to space with Virgin Galactic on a research mission. And I know that you were part of her team. So can you walk us through what your role was with the crew? What was the research that was conducted on that mission?
Yeah, so officially, I was one of 3 co-PIs, and we were on site as payload support. But unofficially, when you are trying to make every part of your mission successful, you were taking on a lot of roles. So there were 3 of us who were serving as Kelly's payload support, myself, Yvette Gonzalez, and Dr. Aaron Prasad. We had 3 payloads. We had a continuous glucose monitor. So that was the one I was the PI, co-PI of. And so, sorry, PI means primary investigator. So that's just jargon for scientific lead. And the reason we care about that is several-fold. So we know from missions in the 90s that there has been evidence of insulin resistance and pre-diabetic changes in astronauts. That's from shuttle, that's from ISS. We just don't know how quickly those changes occur. And typically the gold standard is to just do a finger prick and see what your blood glucose level is. But that gets messy and uncomfortable, especially in microgravity. So over the past few years, we've seen this novel implantable device. It stays in your arm for 2 weeks at a time. It's meant for insulin-dependent diabetics for patient populations on Earth, and we call those CGMs, or continuous glucose monitors. So as you can imagine, they have impacts for making blood glucose monitoring easier and more insightful on both commercial and space flight for orbital and suborbital. So we had done parabolic flight testing of our continuous glucose monitor in April of this year, and it was successful. We were able to verify and validate the functionality of that glucose monitor on parabolic flight, and we're still writing up those results. So we already had the technology readiness level in place, and we were able to get the ethics approval in time and send Kelly to space with a continuous glucose monitor, which is, it's a huge win. It's one of the first times, to our knowledge, it's the first time this has been done on suborbital flight, one of the first times a continuous glucose monitor has been sent to space. And it'll offer us insight as to, what happens with glucose monitors. Maybe it can enable us to send those with diabetes, insulin-dependent diabetes, to space, which is previously a disqualifier for space agency astronauts. So there's a lot of great science on that one payload. We also have the biomonitoring payload. So the Astroskin biomonitoring device is a Canadian innovation. David Saint-Jacques flew it to the International Space Station on his mission in 2018. And in fact, there's heritage within our institute, the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences there, because we worked with the CSA to do the parabolic flight testing of that device right before his flight. But the gap was, we know what vital signs do in microgravity. We know what vital signs do, heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and a few more. We know what they do in 1G, but we don't know what they do during transitions from 1G to hypergravity, for example, during launch and landing, and we don't know what they do during those hypergravity periods. So this was the first end-to-end testing of that device. So Kelly wore that from the time before she took off, during the hypergravity phases, from main engine cutoff to her microgravity transition and all the way back to Earth. So that was our second payload. And then our third one was a physical sciences payload led by Dr. Aaron Prasad, one of our collaborators. It was testing the behavior of fluid cells, a fluid in a microgravity environment. And that has implications for everything from medical devices to life support systems. So all in all, we're 3 for 3 for our 3 payloads. I'm really, really excited. I hope that's coming across. So, it's been a really good year for our science.
That's very exciting. What are the next stages? You've done the research, went on this mission, and now you're analyzing that data. What's the next stages of this project for the glucose monitoring, for example?
Yeah, so taking the glucose monitoring, now we're just taking the time to write up both the parabolic flight and suborbital flight data. What comes next is a lot of write-ups. So in addition to the parabolic flight testing, as well as Kelly's flight, we also had the Neptune mission. So that's Neptune with a 2 in the middle of it. So we did our second underwater mission in May of this year, which was a 6-day, 5-night underwater mission. So there's a lot of science from that to write up as well. So the next steps is sitting still and writing up some really cool science.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So you've been on 2 of the Neptune missions. One was this year, I believe. Then the last one was what, 2019?
2019.
2019. Okay. So tell us about that experience. How did that opportunity come about? What were the goals and objectives? And of course, what was your experience like?
Yeah, so this kind of really speaks to the power of working with great teams and the power of citizen science, because we were 5 crew members on that Neptune mission and on our Neptune 2 mission. And we had all met through a now defunct citizen scientist-astronaut organization. And while that organization kind of fell through, we decided we really liked working with each other. So literally one day, one of our crewmates says, well, if we're not citizen scientist-astronauts, could we be aquanauts? And we just took the idea and ran with it. The commander for that mission, which we'll talk about in a second, he is a former Special Operations Navy dive commander. He lives in the water. He knows everyone in the dive community. He said, look, if this is what we're going to do, I know a place, which is, of course, the Jules Undersea Lodge. And basically, we put together the science, the payloads. We worked with collaborators. We worked on psychological innovation. We worked on stress testing, cortisol studies, technology deployments like the Luxonic suite. We got the ethics approvals, and we worked together for the better part of 8 months in that mission lead up, sorting out the logistics and the science, and it was incredible. So that was our first mission, and our commander, who goes by the name of Joe Duturi, who is an actual special operations commander, like he also has the title of commander and a PhD in biomedical science. So he's a doctor, a scientific doctor as well. He said, what if, is this possible to do this for 100 days? And so he took that first Neptune mission as a proof of concept to seed the idea for a 100-day mission. And in fact, of March of this year, he actually made it happen. And so what was really cool about the timing of our second Neptune mission is Joe Duturi had just passed the world record for most days underwater at 78 days. And we joined him just as he crossed that threshold to have a second mission, a team reunion, and celebrate with him. So we also got some more science done on this mission, some really cool payloads, collaborators, PIs. So we worked with a world-class Caltech molecular geneticist, Dr. Ideal Gonzalez, to study nematode behavior at pressure. So the value of this environment, in addition to being isolated and confined, is that it's higher pressure than we exist at surface pressure, 1.6 times higher pressure. So the behavior of fluids, of science, it's all a little bit different. So we studied the nematode behavior. We worked with a world-class lab out of the University of Toronto. We actually worked with them. We met with them on the parabolic flights, and they're creating synthetic skin for burn victims. And now they're looking, because their solution is so portable and lightweight, they're looking towards creating solutions for astronauts on long duration missions. So we first printed the synthetic skin in microgravity and zero G. And so then they were so wonderful to work with. I asked them, and I said, do you have any interest in hyperbaric environments? And, this is getting a little bit technical, but there is evidence for better wound healing, for ulcers, for wounds, for diabetic patients in hyperbaric chambers. So we decided to study this payload as well in the microgravity environment. I mentioned earlier, we're studying pupillometry in space flight. So we also studied pupillometry, which is the rate at which our eyes constrict, our pupils constrict underwater. So there was a lot of good science. And it's, again, it comes down to working with amazingly smart, accomplished, hardworking scientists, PIs, and crewmates who help to make all of this happen.
That's incredible. I'm excited to continue to hear as the research and these missions are going on, what scientific results you have from those. I'm interested to hear, like you said, faster wound healing. That's incredible. So I would be interested to hear how that continues to develop. So in addition to being an aquanaut, obviously I've been on analog missions as a citizen astronaut as well. And so wanted to understand, I believe is in 2020, you served as commander for the MDRS mission out in the desert of Utah. MDRS is owned and operated by the Mars Society. So tell us about, what was that experience like? You had two missions, one where you were commander and one where you were not. What was the difference between the two missions? Any leadership lessons learned as commander?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. So my first analog mission was at the Mars Desert Research Station in 2018. I was the crew medical officer. And by the time 2020 rolled around, I was promoted to commander, totally different crew. So I don't know that was an actual promotion, but it was really humbling, and it was an honor to be able to be asked to lead a crew. And so with the 2018 mission, what I've learned about being a crew medical officer in an extreme environment, so one that's isolated, confined, resource limited, the way I would work in a hospital setting changes a little bit. So knowing all of my crew members inside out, asking them ahead of time, what their medical conditions are, insofar as they're comfortable sharing, promising them the confidentiality, thinking about prevention, thinking about ways that we can mitigate any major medical conditions. So one example of that is the first tour we went on. It was in April, but it was the desert, so it was hot. So on days we would plan EVAs or sorties from our hab, we would actually, look at how sunny it was and either shorten the EVA or call it altogether to mitigate the risk of heat stroke. Changing how the magnitude of medical condition I would attend to. And this actually took a little bit of a work to change that mindset, because if you and I are out in the non-resource limited world and you scrape your knee, I'm going to expect you to tend to it, because we all know how to deal with hangnails and blisters. But as a crew medical officer, everyone wants to let you know about their medical impacts at all times. And it's actually, you learn to become grateful for that, because you would rather deal with a blister early on before it becomes an infection. So anytime anyone had a scrape or bump, at first I was like, well, deal with it. Why are you telling me about it? And then you realize, no, it's my job to categorize all of these things, tend to it, make sure it's clean, and then also say, well, is this something that someone's recurrently getting for the same reason? Is everyone getting blisters? Then we should talk about that as a group. So that was the first mission. And then on the second mission as commander, you really realize how much you're in charge of everyone's safety, as well as the science, as well as the outreach, and then making sure everyone has fun. And so what really helped us was developing a shared mental model of what everyone's different success criteria were, making sure we were all on the same page. And just also learning from each other. There were some amazingly accomplished folks on that mission. Ones with whom we're really good friends to this day. And making sure that you're kind of catering to everyone's skill level, knowing their fears and their apprehensions going into the mission, and just trying to grow a little bit with each experience.
Sure. Okay. I don't know if you're aware, on last month's episode of Red Planet Live, I interviewed the Crew 15 from Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station. So I know that you've been underwater as an aquanaut. You've been in the desert. Would you go to the Arctic and serve on a mission at Flashline?
I know exactly who that crew is, and I know some of them are on. First of all, shout out to you guys. I think Terry Trevino was part of that mission. I see him online. So congratulations on the amazing work. Absolutely, I would consider it. I had my first Arctic expedition earlier this year with some amazing women explorers from the Explorers Club. They were the first women to winter over solo in the Arctic. And so I went with them to visit their place where they had done this expedition. And the Arctic is an incredibly, incredibly beautiful, special place on this planet. And we also see climate change impacts of what we're doing and what's happening to our planet. It was really humbling. It was awe-inspiring. So any chance to go to the Arctic and Antarctic, I would welcome.
Love it. Okay, well, we may be able to make that happen. Speaking of Terry Trevino, I do see that he posted a question in our chat. The question is, have any VR technologies been developed for crew mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a lot out there. So speaking specifically from our work with Luxonic, not space related, but we have done 360 video, which is another type of immersive technology. So just to back up a quick second, when we talk about immersive, we talk about mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, as well as 360 video. So 360 video is you slip on a headset and you're suddenly in this 360 world. So we've done some work for mental health through our work at Luxonic. And then I know Trish, which I like to call Space Health DARPA. So Trish is the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, operated through Baylor College of Medicine. They've done some very important work with funding both mental health and VR-based initiatives. And those are just two examples, but there are a lot more out there because mental health is incredibly important when you're in a confined environment. Nobody wants to be that astronaut that's kicked off the habitat. That's always awkward. And it's also really important for Earth. So yeah, there are more and more with every passing day.
That's very exciting. That technology is going to be crucial as we start to develop, opportunities for people to go to Mars. That's really exciting. I know that in preparation for today's episode, we've done a lot of marketing, publishing, that we're going to be holding today's conversation. I know you've got lots of words of encouragement from various organizations. Something I know that you're passionate about is getting women into STEM careers and pursuing that type of education, myself as well. And I know that you've gotten some encouragement from the Universal Female Leadership Academy, and they've actually submitted questions. So their question is, can you please give advice to women and girls with disabilities around the world on pursuing careers in STEM and particularly space exploration?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thanks for reaching out online. It's been fun talking to you. In answer to your question, the landscape of who can go to space is changing. So don't let what the definitions and restrictions are for access to space in terms of medical background stop you, because what was considered disqualifying and what is considered disqualifying at the space agency level is not a deal breaker anymore. And so I would point to the Astro Access organization. They have flown their 2 successful parabolic flight campaigns for ambassadors with disabilities, whether it's quadriplegia, paraplegia, visual impairments, auditory impairments, and just proving that space can be accessible. Even if human spaceflight isn't what you have your eye on, there is a place for you within STEM and within space. And we need to do a better job of making all of these places within STEM and within space more accessible. acceptable, because otherwise we're missing out on valuable perspectives. So it's, it's something that we're working on, that we're seeing more of a push towards. And, that I think the future is really bright. And what's really cool is actually one of the Astro Access ambassadors, Eric Shear, who has flown on their campaign, was actually on my first MDRS mission. So he's deaf. He, was one of the first deaf analog astronauts. He was a lot of fun to work with on our mission, and he actually taught me how to say Rich Purnell is a steely-eyed rocket man in sign language. Don't ask me what it is because I don't remember it, but I do remember coffee, which is the other important thing I learned how to sign.
Crucial. Yeah. You have to know what coffee, the sign for coffee. No, I love that message and what you've said. That's something very similar that I remember reading from Kelly's book, Not Necessarily Rocket Science, that you don't necessarily have to have a technical degree. You don't necessarily have to be a scientist or an engineer to join the space industry and make an impact and eventually, someday get to space. Like you said before, space is becoming greater with its access for those that, like I said, don't necessarily have that technical prerequisite degree to get to space. So it's a very exciting time, and we're excited to see, what comes in the future as those doors are opened for more people. So I know we have a handful of other questions. This is great. I love everybody's questions right now. We have a question from James Melton. Dr. Pandya, are you aware of new technology related to bone mass or bone density loss?
Yeah, that's a great question. So are you talking about space? Are you talking about Earth? But the answer to both is yes. So for example, right now with those with decreased bone density, for example, osteoporotic women, typically there is the standard of care is a once a week medication that we take to help with bone density loss. And, in recent years, we've come out with a once every 6 months or even once every year IV version of that. So, imagine as a patient, now you have to only worry about your bone density medication once or twice a year. So that, that's one of the innovations. So when we talk about bone density as it pertains to space, without having the luxury of 1G, even as you and I sit here, our muscles, our core muscles are doing work, because our weight-bearing muscles, such as our spines, our pelvises, our femurs, have to work to keep us upright. When we go to microgravity or the zero-G environment, they can get a little bit lazy because they're not fighting gravity anymore. And so without any interventions, astronauts lose bone density at a rate of 1.5% per month. So currently, astronauts on the space station mitigate that through countermeasures. So they perform 1 to 2 hours of aerobic and resistive exercise up on station up to 6 days a week. So what's really cool and new is in September 2020, the Rodent Research 19 experiment came down from the International Space Station. This was a multi-institution effect. And what they did was they took these mutant mice. They jacked up little mice. And if you Google this, if you Google Rodent Research 19, it's adorable because you have like these muscular mice, and they're the mutants. And then they compared them to these wild type non-mutant mice. And the difference was they had something called the ACVR2 neuromuscular blockade. So they would lose less bone density and muscle mass. And so they had the ground groups and the flown groups. And what they found was that these mutant mice actually had less bone density loss and less muscle mass loss. And so literally NASA is engineering Mighty Mouse. So, there's all of these brand new innovations that are coming at every corner. And the cool thing is they also have benefit for populations in need. In this case, those with osteoporosis and neurodegenerative diseases up here back on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question here. What are the health challenges that will be necessary for humans to live successfully on the moon? So we've talked about Mars. Let's go to the moon.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we can talk about the moon, low Earth orbit, and Mars all in the same sphere when we talk about the challenges of long duration and exploration class missions. And typically we talk about the big five. So we talk about this as the RIDGE framework. That's terminology used by NASA, by Trish, and by all of the major ISS and now Lunar Gateway partners. And so RIDGE stands for radiation, isolation, confinement, distance from Earth, gravity, which can be altered gravity, microgravity, or hypergravity, gravity, and then E, which is, I say it's everything else, but it actually stands for hostile environments. So that can be lunar dust, it can be altered day-night cycles. And so imagine you're on the moon. We know from the Apollo era that lunar dust was a very potent skin, eye, and respiratory irritant. So we need to mitigate how that dust interacts with astronauts. It can clog up suit joints. We need to have astronauts that are okay with being away from home for long periods of time. We know that once we go outside the confines of the Van Allen belts, which are, still protective at the level of the International Space Station and still filter out a lot of that higher energy ionizing radiation from galactic cosmic radiation and solar particle events. We don't have that protection at the level of the moon. So radiation mitigation is more of a factor. So there's a lot to think about. And then there's also this giant question mark when it comes to what do humans experience in 1/6 G, because we know we all do relatively well in 1G, and we know that there are a lot of risks, such as we talked about with bone and muscle mass and density loss. We know that fluids shift upwards in microgravity. We just need to know more about how all of that physiology changes in 1/6 gravity. So there's a lot, and there's a lot to think about and mitigate and plan for when it comes to Artemis and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so continuing on the moon topic, we've got a question here. Any comments from Dr. Pandya about Mars Direct versus Moon then Mars would be appreciated. Your perspective.
Yeah, I know that topic can be, people can feel very strongly one way or the other. My philosophy is the more I spend time in emergency medicine is if you don't have to take a risk, or if you can mitigate risk, or if you can prepare yourself by practicing in a lower risk environment, then you should absolutely do that. And so it's funny to say that the moon is lower risk, but compared to Mars, it absolutely is. Because when we think of the transit time to the moon, using Apollo technologies, it would be 2 to 3 days. With the current SLS or Starship technologies, it will be about 5 days, which still, if you have to evacuate, you can get to, you can get back to definitive medical care in days. And you can maybe stabilize your patient and either treat them in situ on the moon or bring them back to Earth. When you think about the challenges for Mars, that's 6 to 9 months journey, depending on the alignment of the two planets. So now if there's a crisis that you have not planned for, have not mitigated for, that's a 6 to 9 months journey away. And it's a 6 to 48 minute round trip communication, depending on the alignment of the two planets. So if you're working in a higher, if you're working in a closer environment where you can sort out some of those risks, mitigate some of those risks, test out how your challenges with surface EVA and a rocky, slippery terrain that you'll also see on Mars will work. That's so much the better. And then the big one is the one that we just talked about, partial gravity. If we know that we can do relatively well with respect to bone, muscle, fluid changes in 1/6 gravity, that actually solves a lot of problems for 1/3 gravity on Mars. So I think it's becoming really clear that I'm in the moon to Mars camp, because I'm all about mitigating risk.
I think you're right about, there are people that feel very strongly one way or the other. So thank you for your feedback on that. And I like what you said. It's almost like you got to learn how to walk before you can run. Mitigate some of those risks. If you can do that, that's probably the safer way to go. One of the questions that we have here, and I like this question. This is from Mark New. Shawna, is there a strong correlation between crew diversity and resilience? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, that's a great question. Not specifically to resilience, but to crew success and performance. So the literature shows that mixed gender crews tend to perform better and also have less conflict. So that's a case for getting more women to Mars. And then when it comes to resilience, I haven't looked into that literature, to be honest, but when it comes to looking for personality types that do well in this type of austere environment, it's those who take what we call a salutogenic approach. And that means rather than saying, oh my gosh, I have to endure this Antarctic deployment. I have to be in this harsh environment. It's looking at those opportunities as growth opportunities, an opportunity to build your character. So, there very well might be some correlation from those who have experienced hardship, whether by virtue of being an immigrant, by virtue of having grown up in poverty, by virtue of, having been the only one in their field of study. That would be speculation on my part, but it's a great question.
I like that. Okay. One of the questions I have for you, on Instagram, I have seen a green feathery friend featured in some of your posts. So for those that don't know who I'm talking about, who is the green feathery friend and where does their name come from?
Yeah, so that would be my parrot, Jules. She is a lovebird. She is 56 grams, give or take. She is a rescue parrot. I have been a lifelong bird lover for most of my life. I had budgies. And now that I'm at home for the month, she's spending a lot of time with me. In fact, you'll see she's gotten into a lot of trouble recently. But she's a great bird. She's very, very friendly. She's like a puppy. She follows us around. So the name Jules actually comes from our time at the Jules Undersea Lodge on our Neptune missions, because she's the exact same green color as the lagoon, and I thought it'd be a good homage to our time underwater. So yeah, I firmly believe in pets and the the joy they can bring, and mine just happens to be a obnoxious, feisty, adorable parrot.
Yeah, I did see, and this goes back to another question we just got. How did the parrot get in trouble? Escaped?
Yeah, there's been a couple things she's done. So yesterday, so when I work emergency room, I work all across the province. She travels really well. She comes with me, but she actually got out of her cage and flew outside. She's an exotic bird. This is Canada in the winter. So she was up 40 feet in a tree. There's pictures on social media if you want to check it out. She came back because she likes her treats better than being cold. So she's safe now. And then last week, a patient's family member actually took her out of the hospital without permission. So she was bird napped, and again, safely returned. But she's been into all sorts of adventures that no one asked for lately.
She's got a wild life going on. She was taken by a patient's family, and how did you get her back? I'm so invested in this now.
Yeah, and so there's a little bit more to the story, but I'm always cautious about giving away patient details. But basically, there was a bit of a story that the bird was found outside and was cold, and that's what the story that was relayed to the family. The bird was indoors, so there was this claim that the bird was abandoned, but Jules definitely isn't abandoned. She recognizes all of us. My mom is her favorite person. In fact, over me, if we're in the same room, she'll go to my mom. So she was kind of picked up as a quote unquote abandoned bird outdoors in the Canadian winter, which certainly wasn't the case.
Okay, well now like I said, I'm invested. I will keep an eye out for the adventures of Jules on your Instagram. Make sure that the next time she goes out somewhere, she gets safely returned again. One of the things that I was researching, in preparation for today's conversation, I did see that in 2015, you were part of the crew to first test a commercial spacesuit in zero gravity. That's very exciting. How did that opportunity come about? What was the experience like?
Yeah, so this was through my involvement with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, and I had entered. So it was also this is you may see AAS referred to as Project Possum online. Possum is yet another acronym which stands for Polar Suborbital Science of the Upper Mesosphere. So I just completed ground school, not knowing what to expect, but also realizing I fully wanted to develop my love of space and just had such a tremendous experience. So I signed up for the next course, which was parabolic flight, development of scientific payloads and technology testing. And in this case, the technology we were testing was the Final Frontier Design IVA, or intravehicular activity spacesuit. And we were the first crew up, myself and my partner, Callum Wallach, and we had a certain number of maneuvers to do to test the fine motor movement and the gross motor movement of the suit. And we were just focused on knowing what we had to do parabola by parabola, making sure we weren't getting motion sick, making sure that we were just getting the scientific data that we set out to do as citizen scientists. And we weren't even thinking about anything else. And then when we landed, the executive director said, hey, you know, I think you might be the first crew in the world to test a commercial spacesuit in microgravity. And so it's something you don't think about. But that was, you know, a really cool icing on the cake as part of that really amazing experience, because how often do you get to do that? You know, if you ever have the opportunity to test a spacesuit in zero G, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's super cool. Okay, I know we're getting low on time, so I want to make sure I can get as many of these audience questions. So this is a question from AC. In future propulsion systems, where constant acceleration of 1.5 to 2G for prolonged periods, say weeks or months, will occur, I wonder if any psychological or physiological studies have been done?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, if there are prolonged periods of hypergravity, it would be interesting to see the data. I haven't personally looked into it, and I'm not really aware of what prolonged G transitions do. So definitely in parabolic flight, as you go from 1G, prior to getting into microgravity, you have a 2G pull, but that's just a matter of seconds. So we know that, like, if you can even just simulate, how do we simulate having increased weight? You know, we add more weight to ourselves if we gain weight, or we put on ankle weights. It's harder on our joints. So definitely joint mitigation. So our bones might be stronger, but our joints would take a lot of wear and tear. There would be the risk of arthritis, chronic pain, and then also blood pressure. So if you're someone with chronically low blood pressure, you might be more prone to syncope or fainting if you can't overcome that gravity gradient. So just to give you an example, looking at the world of comparative physiology, the resting blood pressure for a giraffe is way higher, like would be considered pathologically and almost emergently high for a human. It's something like 210 or 220 over 110, right? So that's double what you'd want for a human. But when you think about the height gradient that the giraffe's heart has to pump through to actually get blood flow to the brain, it makes sense that, you know, when we think about the corollary in hypergravity, our hearts would have to work harder, and probably our blood pressure would have to go up a little bit to be able to adequately perfuse our brain. So that's just me thinking out loud, but that's such a nerdy question. I love it.
And I love that you were so quick to just rattle it off. You knew the scientific answer there, you know, giving your physician perspective on it. So I appreciate that. You know, right now we're December 19th. We're at the end of the year, closing out 2023. You know, what do you have in store for 2024? Are there any particular projects you're excited about, or anything that we can get a sneak peek on?
Yeah, I am just finalizing the details on an upcoming analog mission in a site I haven't been to before, so stay tuned for that announcement. There will be a lot more science and a lot more cool locations. I will be at the NASA Investigators Workshop presenting on our work with mixed reality ultrasound and virtual reality. I will be one of the speakers at the SHOP Summit, which is the Space Flight Human Optimization and Performance Workshop in Houston. That will be in April. There's a lot going on. That's just off the top of my head. So, you know, I'm pretty public about what I call my tour dates. So if you're around at any of those conferences, please come say hi. I'll also be at the International Space Development Conference in May in Los Angeles. And, you know, I hope to see many of you there.
Yeah, would love that. If ever have the opportunity to go to any of those, please seek Dr. Shawna Pandya out. I would do the same. I know we've got one other question right here from an audience member. It says, what are your thoughts about pets for crew mental health for long-term space missions? I love this.
Yeah, you know, it's something that I've started talking about when I talk specifically about psychological resilience for long duration missions, because, you know, if you're a pet lover, you do know the joy that pets can bring. So then the trade-offs would be, well, how much life support and resources are they going to use in terms of food, water, atmospheric scrubbing, waste, dander. You know, if you're having lots of dander in microgravity, that could be a lot. And then what would be the impact on crew morale? You know, if that beloved pet were to die and the crew really grew attached to it, even if it were a little hamster, or, you know, if it were a puppy. So, you know, for those of you who watched Space Force, the comedy, when it was on Netflix, there was that astronaut who snuck her cockatiel to the moon. That would absolutely be me. I'd probably bring Jules with me. But there are always trade-offs. So I think it should be something that should be considered. Like if we're talking about a settlement on Mars, how do we make an austere environment less austere? We bring not just ourselves, not just our resources to survive, but we live as humanity and we survive and we thrive because we live in an ecosystem. So that involves other living creatures. So I think at some point when we go to the discussion from a mission to a settlement, that should definitely be part of the discussion.
Well, you just won over all the pet lovers there. So I think you a few new fans. And yeah, if you could ever take Jules with you, that would be pretty cool too. Hopefully, no more escape missions, and she'll stay contained and deeply inside. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up today's episode. Shawna, thank you so much for being a part of Red Planet Live. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. So insightful. It was a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for your awesome questions.
Great questions. And I want to share a heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners and everyone who has supported the podcast this year. I'm, again, grateful for the opportunity to host and get to speak with so many amazing guests. 2023 has been an incredible year, both personally and professionally. And I'm confident to say that, as I always do, the best is yet to come, because in 2024, we have very special guests coming up, and I can't wait to share those with you. So this holiday season, I wish all the best to you and yours. Stay warm, stay safe. Happy holidays, and have a great new year, everyone. Bye, everybody.